Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and I hope you had a wonderful day. Recently I've been looking into Model Context Protocol and I found it very interesting. So I decided to create a GitHub repository called MCP Lab and develop a few projects with it and put those projects on that repository. In this first video, I want to cover all the basics and the fundamentals that we need to start working with MCP. So first, I will talk about Model Context Protocol itself. I will explain how it works using this schema on the right. And I will also mention two main factors that in my opinion are making it very special. In the next step, I will talk about the integration of different MCP servers with Claude Desktop app. So we'll see how we can connect one or multiple local MCP servers to our desktop app. And also I will show you how to connect your desktop app to a remote and public MCP server. I will also talk about a few different methods that would help you to debug your MCP servers. We can also do the same with the open source models. So in the next step, I will also show you how to do the same, how to connect local MCP servers or remote MCP servers to open source models using Ollama. And finally, I will also show you how to do the same with the OpenAI models, the GPT models themselves. So let's first start by explaining Model Context Protocol. Model Context Protocol, in simple words, is another way of designing agentic systems. Together, we have already developed multiple projects using LLM agents, and this is just another way of doing it. But if that is the case, then what is it that makes MCP special? In my opinion, there are two main factors, and the first one is the most important one. MCP is a standard way of designing LLM agents. And by that, I mean, for instance, if I have an MCP server that is already up and running with a specific large language model, for instance, let's say it is connected to Claude Desktop. Without making any change to my code, I can connect that server to a GPT model, or I can connect that server to an open source model. That is the biggest aspect of an MCP server. And the second one is that the agent itself, or the large language model, does not have direct access to whatever is happening in the backend. So for instance, if my server has access to multiple tools, and those tools are making API calls, they are connected to databases, maybe sensitive databases, and for instance, they may be connected to the cloud infrastructure that I'm using, GCP or AWS, the agent itself does not have direct access to any of them. All the agent can do is to call any of the servers based on the user's request. And the last note about choosing the large language model itself is that the LLM should support tool calling, especially when we want to work with the open source models. That is an important factor, and we have to verify that our large language model can make function calls. Okay, so now let me explain the project that I prepared for this video, and then we will go through the code together. So the project contains two different sets of servers. These three are our local MCP servers, and this is the remote MCP server that I want to use and show you how we can connect it to our large language models. The first server is dailynews.py that fetches the most recent news from two different websites, NPR and BBC, based on the user's request, and it can give back the headlines to our large language model, and the LLM can show them to our user. We have a stocknews.py that gets the most recent information about a specific stock, and we have Wikipedia summary.py that gets a summary for a specific subject in Wikipedia. And we also have the Airbnb server, which is a server for searching Airbnb and get listing details. This is the remote server that we want to connect to our Claude Desktop. And then I want to use the same code and the same project, but with two different frameworks. So first, I'm going to use Ollama, and from Ollama, we are going to use Llama 3.1 and Falcon 3. These are two models that support tool calling. That is the first thing about them. And also I chose them because they are not heavy and they are not big models. So you can even run them on Google Colab if you want. And from OpenAI, I want to just simply use GPT-4o Mini because as soon as we go through these two projects and we get to a point that we learn how we can connect our servers to open source models, then using GPT-4o Mini is just simply changing a small string in our code. So that would be a very simple change, a very easy change, and I will quickly show you how we can do that as well. But from there, you can then test it with different OpenAI models as well. So GPT-4o, GPT-4.1, or any other model that you have in mind, you can easily use in the code as well. So The last note about the project that I prepared is the operating system that I'm going to use here. So probably you have noticed that here I have the Windows logo and here I have the Linux logo. The reason behind that is just based on my search and experience, there is still not a framework that supports MCP in all the operating systems. Each one of them is now designed for a specific operating system. For instance, for Claude Desktop, you can use macOS or Windows, but when it comes to Ollama and using OpenAI, at least with the framework and with the method that I want to use, it only works on a Linux operating system. So I'm going to use WSL, which is something that you can also use, but in case you also have access to Linux operating system, you can use that one as well. All right, so now that we went through the scheme of the project, let's start and build the project step by step together. And for that, I want to use the README file that I provided to you in a GitHub repository. This README file contains all the details that you need to implement the project from scratch. It starts from cloning the repository up to the point that we implement all our MCP servers and we use them with each individual large language model. So the first step, as I mentioned, is cloning the repository. This is the command that you can use to clone the repository. This is the URL. And then, of course, you have to change the directory and go to MCP Crash Course. So MCP Lab is the name of the GitHub repository itself. And MCP Crash Course is the subfolder that contains the project that I'm explaining in this video. Just like my other repositories, MCP Lab will eventually contain different subfolders and each one of them will be a separate project. After cloning the repository and moving into the directory of our project, the next step is to prepare the Python environment. So in some of the tutorials and documentations that I checked, I saw that they are suggesting to use UV as the dependency manager instead of pip. I tested the project with both, and I really didn't feel the need to switch to UV or any other dependency manager at the moment. I developed both the project in Windows and WSL with pip. I didn't have any issues, and I'm going to stick with pip. But in case your preference is UV, I also provided the instructions for using UV instead of pip for your project. This is the command that we can use for creating the virtual environment, and this is the command that you can use to activate it on Windows, or in case you are on Linux or Mac, you can use this command right here. So as soon as you have the environment and as soon as you activate it, the next step is to install the libraries. We want MCP for implementing our MCP servers. MCP CLI is the library that we want to use for debugging our servers, and Beautiful Soup, for instance, is the library that I want to use for scraping the websites. I already prepared a virtual environment for my project. It is called MCP-test, and as you can see, I'm using Python 3.12.9 for this project. And in case I open a terminal, you can see that my virtual environment is already activated, and if I run piplist, you can see the list of the libraries that are installed on my environment. Okay, so when we have our environment ready and after we install the libraries, the next step is to prepare our servers and to run the servers. So first, let's go through one of the servers and let's see how we can implement an MCP server. There are 4 main steps that you need to follow to implement an MCP server. The first one is to import the libraries that you need. As I mentioned, we need MCP, and from MCP, I'm loading FastMCP. And these are the libraries that I need to implement the logic that I want to implement for the specific server that I have in mind. For instance, in the case of a daily news, I need Beautiful Soup to scrape some websites and then return the result to our large language model. The next main step is to call FastMCP, assign it a name, and this is the name that will also show up on our Claude Desktop, assign it a host, and also assign it a port. Timeout is not compulsory, but it just gives us a better experience when interacting with this project. So for now, let's just keep it here. And also signal handler is another step that is not compulsory, but it helps us to have a graceful shutdown when we use Ctrl+C on our server. The next main step is to implement the tool itself. Just like the previous tools that we implemented and we converted them into a JSON schema before passing them to the large language model, this tool also must have a concise and precise description. The description would help the large language model to understand when and how to call a specific tool. For instance, this part would explain what this tool does, so the large language model know when to call this tool. And this part would help the large language model to understand how it can call this tool by informing it about the arguments that the function expects. And also the large language model would understand about the output of our function. And I personally found it very helpful to use an example for how to call that specific tool in the description. And that is why I also added an example use case. We also have to use the mcp.tool decorator to wrap the tool and to create a standard tool that then we can use it with the large language models that support tool calling. And this is how we can create a standard MCP tool. The main body of my tool is the Python logic that I want to implement for getting the headlines from those two websites, NPR and BBC. So depending on the user's request, I get the information from each one of these two websites, we prepare the headlines, and we return the headlines to our large language model. So this was the third main step. The fourth and the last main step is to use mcp.run for running our server. So as soon as you execute this module, it is going to host Daily News MCP server at port 8080, and that is how our Claude Desktop or our large language model will be able to interact with this tool. And if I open another module, for instance, Stock News, you can see that the structure is exactly identical as Daily News. We have the exact 4 steps: loading the libraries, calling fastMCP, defining the tool, and finally running our tool using mcp.run. And this is how you can implement an MCP server. So we have our servers. Let's run the server. So I will open the terminal. And actually, first, let me show you the output of one of our tools. So first, let's execute and import the libraries. Perfect. In the next step, let's give source. Actually, I have to remove this one. Let's define source as NPR, and let's run this code right here. So this code is going to scrape the information from NPR, create the headlines, and then this is the headlines that we want to pass to our large language model, for instance. So right now we are preparing the top 10 headlines from that website, and this 10 right now is a static variable that I define in my Python code. This is not the right way of doing it, but my main goal was not to prepare the Python code itself. I wanted to prepare an MCP server, and my goal was to show you how to prepare that server. So then from here, you can improve this function, or for instance, if you want to implement a complex task, you can think of this MCP server as the final wrapper that wraps the work of 10 other different modules. So right now, we have one function that performs the task, and also it returns the output. But imagine that this function can receive the information from 10 other different functions and to do a processing on them to prepare the output and then to send the output to the large language model. So this is a sample output for dailynews.py. In the next step, let's run our tools. So if I also show you in the README file, just to show you the steps. So step number 4, start the servers. I'm going to start my dailynews.server using this command, Python source servers dailynews.py. As you can see, my server is now up and running on port 8080. And now our server is available and we can connect it to our large language model. So I'm not going to run these two servers at the moment because first I want to show you how to connect one tool to Claude Desktop, and then we will add the second tool together. So the first step is to download and install Claude Desktop. I already downloaded it and I have it available on my computer. As I mentioned, at the moment you only can install Claude Desktop on Mac OS and Windows, and I'm using Windows right now. So step number 2 to connect our Claude Desktop to our tool is to inform our Claude Desktop about the existence of our tool by modifying Claude config. So if I open the app, if I go into File, Setting, Developer section, you can see Edit Config right here. As soon as you click on that, it's going to open the directory for you, and all you need to do is to open the config file in an IDE like VS Code that I'm using at the moment. So the config file is empty at the moment, but we can populate it, and using this file, we can inform the Claude Desktop about the existence of our tool. I prepared a folder called Anthropic Developer Config Templates. And this folder contains two subfolders, using pip and using UV. So based on the dependency manager that you're using, the way that you should populate the config file is different. I'm using pip right now. So if I open this folder, I can see two different templates, single tool and multiple tools. So let's copy and paste the content of our single tool in Claude Desktop config.json, and let's review it together. First, we have MCP Servers key. This is the main key, and this key contains one or different servers that you want to add to your Claude Desktop. The first server that I want to add here is Daily News. So this is the name of my server, and this is again what will show up on Claude Desktop as well. First, we have command, and this is the key that contains the absolute path to your Python file, to your python.exe file. So this is very important. You need to pass the absolute path right here. Otherwise, I noticed that Claude Desktop will face some difficulties to execute that file, and this is a standard way of doing it. I found it working in almost all the scenarios, so that is the way that I started to populate my config files. So this is the absolute path, and in case in Windows you want to find the absolute path, for instance, to this Python environment right here, I can write var Python, and it gives you the absolute path right here. In the argument section, we need to add the absolute path to our Python module. So this is the absolute path to dailynews.py. How you can get it is by going through source, servers, right click on daily news, and copy path. So in case you copy the path, it will be like this. So as you can see, it has only one backslash, which will actually throw an error if you just paste it like that. Just make sure that you change each one of these single backslash into a double backslash. That's all you need to do. Okay, so we have the arguments. The host is exactly the same as the one that we defined in our code. Port is the same and timeout is the same. So this is a sample config file. And right now, by saving this file, let me also save it. Let me close this. Our Claude Desktop should be able to get access to this tool. But there is just one more step. In order to add a new tool to Claude Desktop, after modifying and editing your config file, you need to make sure that you restart your Claude Desktop app. And it just doesn't work if you close the app and if you reopen it. What you need to do is go into your system tray section where you can find your Bluetooth device, find your sound device. Right there, you will also see Claude Desktop app is up and running in the background. You have to close it from that section. It's in the bottom right section of your Windows. So I'll go there, I'll quit it, and now I want to reopen my app. So this is the app right now. I didn't receive any error because everything is working fine, and my Claude Desktop has access to this file right now. So if I open the app, if I go into File, Settings, Developer section, we can see that Daily News is up and running. So two things can go wrong here. The first one is if you make a mistake in the config file. In that scenario, the moment that you open the app, it's going to throw a warning and it shows you that something went wrong in the background and Claude Desktop could not access the new tool. The second issue is that the config file is fine, but the code itself has an issue. So in that case, you will not see a warning, but the moment that you will ask Claude Desktop a question that requires to execute that tool, Claude Desktop will give it a try and it will fail in the background and it will show you that something went wrong, and either the chatbot would try to just provide you with an answer from its own tools and knowledge, or the chatbot would just tell you that it cannot give you the answer. So I will show you both scenarios when we are going to debug our MCP server. But for now, let's test our new tool with our chatbot. But before that, let me also continue and go through our README file and make sure that I didn't miss anything. So this is, again, another template for the config file for Claude Desktop. This is how we can add two different tools to it. I will show you in the next step. And this is for finding the absolute path for your Python and for your .py modules. And this is for adding a remote server. I will explain it to you after we test it. But for now, let's just prompt our chatbot and let's see how it can call that tool. So this is an example prompt that we can use. If I open the chatbot, I paste the prompt. Let me just make sure that daily news. So this is a very specific prompt, and I specifically mentioned the name of the tool because Anthropic itself can scrape the web and can search the web for you, and I just don't want Anthropic to use its own tools, and I wanted to use the daily news that we provided to it. So let's run this prompt. The first thing is it's going to ask you for permission to work with this tool. So I'm going to allow it to work with it. As you can see, the request is with source equal to NPR. This is the response from our code. This is exactly what we saw when we tested the code locally, and this is the result from Claude Desktop. So our Claude Desktop successfully called our tool, and it is showing us the result from NPR website that is coming from our tool directly. So this is how we can add one single tool to our Claude Desktop. Now, as I showed you in the README file, let's also add the second tool. So far, I'm running the daily news. Let me open another terminal, go to the README file, and get the command from here. So I have stock news as well. Actually, this is the UV command. This is the command that I want. So Python source servers stocknews.py. I'm going to run it. It says stock news is now running at port 5000. So my server is now up and running. All I need to do is to update the config file and add the second tool to our Claude Desktop. I will open my Claude Desktop, go to File, Setting, Developer, Edit Config. Let's open this file in our VS Code. So this is only one tool. For adding the next tool, what I need is to add the second tool like this. So we had actually daily news like this. So this is the daily news. This is what we added to our Claude Desktop. This is the second tool that we want to add. So let me copy and paste this right here. And as you can see, I just added another key here called stock news in MCP servers with the exact same structure as what we discussed earlier. It has the Python directory and it has the module directory. And it also has the information that we provided inside our module itself. So let me save this file, restart my Claude Desktop, and reopen it. So again, we didn't have any errors. This shows that our Claude Desktop at least could successfully access those two tools. Let's open Setting, Developer. Now we have stock news and daily news. So this is how you can add multiple tools to your Claude Desktop. Let's also test this one and just quickly send the sample prompt that I provided to you right here. So use stock news to get news for Tesla. Copy this one, add it like this. So again, stock news tool to get news for Tesla. So it's going to again ask for permission to connect to that tool, allow always. Ticker is Tesla, TSLA, and this is the result from our function. So this result is coming directly from the second tool that we added to our Claude Desktop. So far, we added two local tools to our Claude Desktop. There is a third tool, Wikipedia Summary, and I just want to keep this module as an example for you. So the moment that you clone the repository, you have one extra example that you can connect it to Claude Desktop yourself and you can test it by yourself. So let me show you how we can add an external server to our Claude Desktop. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two different types of servers, the ones that we develop locally, and also there are so many other servers that you can access that are public, and you can access them and you can add them to your chatbots. So I added a URL for a repository that contains a lot of examples for you. So if I open this URL, and if you scroll down, you can see a lot of public MCP servers that you can use. So specifically, I want to use Airbnb right here. You can see Airbnb MCP server. If you open it, it's another GitHub repository that contains the instructions for how to add that server to your Claude Desktop. So this is what you need to add to that config file. So let me copy this one, go back to my VS Code, open Claude Desktop config, and let's add the Airbnb server to our chatbot as well. So there are two ways that you can do it. You can either add that as a single tool to our chatbot, and then all you need to do is to remove this section and paste the information from the repository directly right here. Or you can add it as the third tool alongside the two local servers that we already added to our chatbot. And in that scenario, all you need to do is to get this section right here, remove the rest, and add it right here. So like this, you can have two local servers and one remote servers, and you can get access to your Claude Desktop app to all three of them. So let me again quit the app, reopen it again. Perfect. Again, no errors. I can go into setting, developer, and you can see that Airbnb was also added here. And now we can also test our Airbnb tool right here. So I provided a sample prompt in the README file, and I'm asking use my Airbnb tool and find an apartment in Italy for 25th of September 2025. So let's ask it from the chatbot. So first it is calling Airbnb search, and these are the arguments that it's using to call that function. And this is the result. So just to show you where that Airbnb search came from, if you check this repository, you can see that this MCP server contains two different tools. The first one is Airbnb search, and the second one is Airbnb listing details. So the chatbot didn't call Airbnb listing details, but both of these tools can be successfully called, and you can get the result from both of them. So let's go back to the chatbot. Perfect. So these are the results. Again, they are coming from the Airbnb remote MCP server. So up to this point, we saw how we can implement a local MCP server, and we saw how we can add that local MCP server to our Claude Desktop. We also saw how we can add a remote MCP server to our Claude Desktop. In the next step, I just want to quickly show you how to debug your MCP server in case something goes wrong. So first, let me open my Claude Desktop, and actually let me intentionally create a typo here. So I have a stock new.py. My expectation is that right now, as soon as I restart my Claude Desktop, it should give me a warning. Perfect. Stock news, server disconnected. So it is telling us that something went wrong. And this is the warning that I was expecting to see. So there are two different ways that you can solve these problems. The first one is to go into the setting and open logs folder. It is going to open a log folder, and you can see that there are different logs for different tools. And this is stock news right here. So if I open this log right here, you can go through the end and you can see the last error. So it is saying no such file or directory. So based on this sentence, you can easily figure out the typo in your config file and you can fix it. This is one way to do it. So let me quickly fix this. The second way to debug an MCP server is by using the MCP CLI. That by itself requires a few preliminary steps that we need to go through first. So this is the section that explains all the details that are needed to work with MCP CLI. First of all, we need to install it in our environment. This is something that I also explained earlier in the README file. And in order to debug your MCP server using MCP CLI, you need to make sure that Node.js, NPM, and NPX are installed on your computer. So in order to make sure that you have it or you have them, you can open a terminal and you can run these commands. As you can see, I already have them installed on my computer, but in case something goes wrong and you don't have them, you can just follow the instructions that I provided you in the README file and you can install them on your computer. I provided the instructions both for Windows or Mac and also for Linux. And this is also required for when we want to test our MCP servers with Ollama for the open source models, and also for when we want to test it with the GPT model. So as soon as we have installed all the dependencies, we can run the server by using MCP dev. So MCP dev and the path to our module. So the module is in source, servers, And let's open one of them. For instance, daily news. So when you run it, it is going to open it right here. And when you open it, you can then execute that module and you can start and debug your module. But before I show you a sample execution of our daily news.py, let me mention a few important notes here. First of all, the command is by default set to UV. As I mentioned, UV is the preferred and the suggested dependency manager, and it is using UV run to execute our Python module. So there are two ways that we can execute our module here. We can either change UV to Python and use Python and then our module name, or you can simply install UV in your environment, pip install UV inside your environment, and then your environment should be able to execute this Python module as well. But there is another note here, the second note. Based on experience, when we run our modules like this, source, servers, daily news.py, if I try to connect to this server using either UV or Python, both of them would fail. So let's test it. And by the way, I already have UV installed on my library, on my environment, so it should work. But let's connect it. Okay, so we have an error, and the error is file not found. So let's see what was the issue here. As you can see, it didn't figure out the proper directory to our Python module. So this is dailynews.py. This is source, and it couldn't figure out that server is a subfolder inside source. And apparently this is how far this can go. So when I executed MCP dev and my module name, I was sitting in MCP crash course folder. And immediately inside that folder, it is looking for the module name. So this is something that you can easily fix by, for instance, if I go back into my VS Code, if I cancel the previous execution and go inside source, servers, and then MCP dev and daily news, then our MCP inspector should be able to connect to this server. So let me open this one and let's test it again. So again, I'm going to use UV first, and then I will show you how you can use Python. Perfect. So we got connected to our MCP server, and if I go inside tools, list tools, it is going to show me the tool name inside dailynews.py. So just to show you also how we can execute a sample tool. So if I click on this one, you can see that it has NPR as the default value. If I run the tool, it is going to show us the output for our MCP server. But let's also test it with Python. So you just need to change this one to Python and remove everything behind dailynews.py and try to connect to it again. Again, you can connect to it, list the tools, get latest news, NPR, run tools, and we have the result from our MCP server. So this is how you can start and debug your MCP server in case you want to run the whole server all at once. But on the other side, during the walkthrough over our MCP servers, I also showed you, for instance, how you can execute a small portion of your code just to make sure that it is working as expected. That is a Pythonic way of doing it. So if I have this function, I can execute these lines inside my Python using ipykernel. That is one of the libraries that I added in the README file for this exact purpose. So if I run these libraries like this, I can see the result on the right side, and I can start debugging my code in this way as well. But if you have a complex project, then things will become more sophisticated and more complicated than what we have right now. Anyhow, these are the few ways that you can debug your code. First of all, you can use the logs. The next thing is using MCP inspector. And finally, you can find a way to also debug your code in a Pythonic way and run the functions and run the code step by step inside an interacting window. So that is for the debugging part of our project. In the next step, I want to show you how we can use the MCP servers that we created together using Ollama and with open source models. So I will go to WSL. It is now trying to connect to my Linux Perfect. So I go back to home, GitHub, and then MCP Lab, MCP Crash Course. Now let's go through the steps that would allow us to use our MCP servers with the open source models. Okay, so I mentioned about the environment itself. I'm using the Linux operating system, and I specifically use WSL in case you are using Windows just like me, and you want to install WSL, you can follow the guide on this URL. Again, we need Node.js and NPM. We need to prepare a Python environment, and we need to install the libraries. And these are all the steps that I have already covered in the first section of this README file. In the next step, we need to download and install Ollama itself. So this is the official website. You can download it from here, and you can install it on your operating system. After you have Ollama, you can pull these two large language models. The first one is Llama 3.2, and the second one is Falcon 3. And both of them support tool calling. This is a very important aspect. I mentioned it in the beginning of the video. And these are, for instance, two open source models that would allow you to make a function call. There are a few open source libraries that would allow us to use our MCP servers with open source models. I used a few of them, and each one of them has its own downside. But eventually, for this tutorial, I decided to go with this one, Prison AI Agents. This is a library that is coming from this repository. This repository has a big community around it. I found it more straightforward than the other ones, and I think it's also a little bit more reliable than the others. But the big takeaway from my experience is that there are still so many different things that need to be added to each one of those libraries. For instance, this one does not work on Windows. At least in my experience, I couldn't run this library in Windows, but when I switched to WSN and Linux, it immediately started to work. So if you're interested to use MCP servers with open source models, this is the library that I would personally recommend at the moment. Okay, so beside the libraries that I mentioned earlier in the README file, this is just the last library that we need to install in our environment. You can easily install it using pip install. And to connect the open source models with the MCP servers, you just need to follow a very simple template, just like this one. For instance, to add one tools to an agent, and our agent right now is Falcon 3, you can simply wrap it inside agent class, give it an instruction, choose the large language model, and add your MCP server, just like this, inside this MCP wrapper. And in case you want to add two tools, you can create an agent for each one of them, and then wrap both of them inside this class called Prison AI Agents. So again, each one of these two tools is exactly identical to the one that we saw above, but the only difference here is that then we are going to wrap both of them using this class right here. So this is for how we can connect our local MCP servers to an open source model. The way that we can connect a remote MCP server to an open source model is very similar. Again, we have the agent class, we have instructions, LLM, but this time, instead of giving it the module path for our local MCP server, we are going to give it a path like this. Where is it coming from? If you go into the Airbnb GitHub repository, if you scroll down again, you can easily find that's just like this right here. So you can, and that is also why we need NPX. That is where we are using NPX to allow our agent to interact with that remote MCP server. So as you can see, all of them have a consistent template, which is something that I really liked. And you can even use that library to connect MCP servers to OpenAI models, GPT-4o Mini, for instance, in this case, or any other model that supports tool calling. So that is why I really liked this library, because it is very easy to use. It is pretty straightforward, and it works well overall. Again, I think it still needs a lot of improvements, but for an experiment and for just having a quick tests using the open source models, this is a fantastic choice. So now that we know how we can use our MCP servers, both local and remote MCP servers, with open source models and also the OpenAI model. Let's quickly execute each one of them and see its performance. One last note before I execute the modules is that in case you're also using WSL, just like me, there might be a DNS issue which would cause some connectivity issues with your WSL, but you can solve it using sudo nano etsresolve.config. Just open this file and add, for instance, Google DNS, public DNS as an example right here. So this is a line that, in case you don't have it, just add it there and make sure that there will be no connectivity issues for your WSL as well. All right, so now that we have that, let's run our server. So for instance, Python source servers and daily news. Okay, so our server is up and running. Let me open, for instance, which one is this? This is the OpenAI. I will run this at the end. So this is single tool agent Ollama. So here we are going to use Ollama 3.2, and it is connected to dailynews.py. So if I open another terminal, and if I go with Python 3 source single tool agent MCP Ollama. So it's getting access to our tool, list tool request, and this is now the chatbot that we can interact with it. Just to quickly show you the code, this is the exact template that we saw in the README file, and this is a simple while loop that allows me to interact with our chatbot in the terminal. Summarize the news using daily news tool. Let's see what happens. So it has access to get latest news. So that is the problem for using a small model. I have daily news, and here I have get latest news. Use get latest news and tell me the headlines. There you go. So the model called that function. This is the result of that function call, and this is the model's output. Here's a summary of the news using the daily news tool. So initially I got a little bit confused. I thought I received an error, but that was the model getting confused actually, and it is because that model is very small. So that is for having a single tool and connecting it to our open source large language model, which is Llama 3.2 at this case. So here's the module that shows us how we can connect our open source model to our remote MCP server, the Airbnb server. So initially I tested this module with Llama 3.2 and Falcon 3, and both of these models are 3 billion parameter models. And since the JSON output from this server is quite big, both of them struggled to process that output. So the first thing is that both those models have access to our tools from that server, and they can execute the tools. But the issue is they cannot process the output of the tools. So I decided to test Falcon 3 7 billion parameter model, and I also updated the README file for you. So keep that in mind. This is still not a very powerful model, but it's going to show us a better performance. So let me run this module, and the prompt is find an apartment in Italy for 25th of September 2025 for a single person. This is the same prompt that I'm going to also ask the GPT model, so we can compare the performance of these two models. This is the JSON output that I just mentioned. As you can see, it's quite big. And let's just make sure that our large language model has access to these two functions, which it has access to them. And let's see the result. Based on the provided JSON data, it appears that there are listings for accommodation in Italy, but none specifically for a single person or a specific date, such as 25th of September 2025. So it has access to the functions. It could execute them, but this is not the proper response that I'm looking for. So let me also test it with a different prompt. So this prompt is a little bit more simple. Find a place in Italy for 20th of May and show me the listing. So let's see how the model would do with this one. Okay, so the response is based on the provided JSON data. Here are some options for accommodations in Italy for a group of 20 people starting on May 20th. So I don't know exactly how probably because of this 20, the model thought that I'm looking for a place for 20 people, but that's okay. The main objective here is to see how we can connect our open source model to a remote MCP server. So we just did it. We saw how the model can interact with the tools, and we saw how the model can give us a response. Now let's go to our next module and let's see how we can connect our OpenAI model with the same MCP server. So the first note is that we can also connect our GPT model using this library to our local MCP servers. But here, just for this example, I'm going to connect it to our remote Airbnb MCP server and see its performance. Also, the changes in this code are first changing the model name right here, and also I'm loading my API key from the environment variables. So from here, let's see how our GPT-4o Mini would process the JSON output from our Airbnb MCP server. The output that we just saw, Falcon 3, failed to interact with it properly. At least we got a result from it, but it was not very straightforward. So this is the JSON output, and this is the response. Perfect. So we have a few listings from the OpenAI model, the GPT-4o Mini, and this is exactly what we expected to get from that model. So up to this point, you should have a good understanding of how first to implement both local MCP servers and also how to use with remote MCP servers, how to connect them to Claude Desktop, how to connect them to open source large language models, and also how to connect them to OpenAI models. And these are the information that I'm going to use in the next videos when we want to implement more complicated MCP related projects. And essentially my goal is to gradually let you know how you can use MCP servers, and you can, for instance, connect them to different databases, to chat with different databases, and those sort of projects. So thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.